I stared at my laptop screen, watching the notification pop up that another $15,000 had just hit my business account. A client in California had approved the final phase of their digital marketing campaign. I should have felt excited, but instead, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach as I heard my mom's voice echoing from the kitchen. "Did you hear about Marcus's promotion?" She was practically singing into the phone. "Senior partner at 28? Can you believe it? We're so proud." I closed my laptop and walked to the window of my small one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park. The Chicago skyline stretched out before me, and I could see people rushing along the sidewalks below, bundled up against the October chill. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going, exactly who they were supposed to be. "Nicole, honey, come here," Mom called out. "I'm talking to Aunt Susan about Marcus." I sighed and padded to the kitchen in my fuzzy slippers. Mom was beaming as she held the phone, her graying hair perfectly styled even though it was barely 9 in the morning. She'd probably been up since 6, already planning how to share Marcus's news with every relative and neighbor within a 50-mile radius. "Tell Susan what you're up to these days," Mom said, covering the phone's mouthpiece with her hand. "I'm working on some digital marketing projects," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Mom uncovered the phone. "She's still doing her computer thing, you know how it is. Kids these days and their internet hobbies." She laughed, and I felt my jaw clench. "But Marcus, oh Susan, you should see his new office. Corner suite with a view of the river. He's making partner-level money now." I grabbed a coffee mug from the cabinet, trying to ignore the conversation. 3 years ago, when I'd first started my business, I'd tried to explain to my parents what I was doing. I'd shown them my first big client contract, tried to walk them through the strategy I'd developed for a local restaurant chain. Dad had patted me on the head and said it was cute that I was playing entrepreneur. Mom had asked if I was still planning to go back to school for something more stable. "Nicole's always been our creative one," Mom continued into the phone. "Remember how she used to make those little websites in high school? She's still tinkering with that stuff." Tinkering. As if the comprehensive digital strategy I developed for a Fortune 500 company last month was equivalent to a high school hobby project. I poured my coffee and leaned against the counter, watching Mom's animated gestures as she described Marcus's latest achievement. Her face lit up in a way that used to make me feel warm inside when I was little. Now it just reminded me of everything I wasn't. "You know, Susan, I keep telling people that Marcus got his drive from his father. Same work ethic, same ambition. He's been focused since he was 12 years old, always knew he wanted to be a lawyer." The implication hung in the air like Chicago smog. Marcus had drive and ambition. Marcus had focus and direction. And me? I was just the daughter who played around on computers. What Mom didn't know was that while she was bragging about Marcus's 6-figure salary, I'd cleared 8 figures in revenue last year. What she didn't know was that the little websites I made in high school had evolved into a full-service digital agency with 12 employees and clients across 3 continents. What she didn't know was that the apartment I rented in Lincoln Park was a choice, not a necessity. I owned a condo in River North that I used as my office, and I had enough in savings to buy a house in the suburbs tomorrow if I wanted to, but I'd never told them any of this. Partly because I'd gotten used to being underestimated, and partly because I wasn't sure I was ready for the spotlight that came with success. Marcus thrived on recognition. He lived for the congratulations, the networking events, the professional accolades. Me? I'd built my empire in the shadows, one client at a time, one strategy at a time. "Oh, and Nicole," Mom said, suddenly turning to me. "Marcus is bringing someone special to dinner on Sunday. Finally, a nice girl from his firm, corporate lawyer, just like him. Maybe you can pick up some tips about professional presentation." I almost laughed. Professional presentation. If only she knew about the boardroom presentations I'd given, the corporate executives who hung on my every word when I outlined their digital transformation strategies. "Sounds great, Mom," I said instead, taking my coffee back to my room. As I settled back at my desk, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Heard Mom's been telling everyone about the promotion. Hope you're not too bored with all the family drama. Still doing the freelance thing?" The freelance thing. Even Marcus, who was usually more supportive than our parents, still saw my business as a side hustle. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Yeah, keeping busy. Congratulations on the promotion." I set my phone aside and opened my laptop again. 3 new client inquiries had come in overnight. A tech startup in Seattle, a fashion brand in New York, and a real estate company right here in Chicago. Each one represented more money than Marcus made in a month, but tomorrow at Sunday dinner, I'd sit quietly while everyone celebrated his success and asked me when I was going to find a real job. Maybe it was time to change that. Maybe it was time to stop hiding in the shadows and step into the light. But first, I had an empire to run, and nobody even knew it existed. The next morning, I walked through the glass doors of the merchandise mart, my heels clicking against the polished concrete floors. Most people saw this historic building as just another Chicago landmark, but to me, it was the epicenter of my secret world. My real office was on the 15th floor, a sleek space I'd designed myself with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. "Morning, boss," Sarah called out as I entered. She was my head of operations, a brilliant woman I'd poached from a major advertising agency 2 years ago. Her salary alone was probably more than most people in my family made, but my parents had never even heard her name. "Coffee's already brewing," added Jake, my lead developer, without looking up from his 3-monitor setup. "Also, the Morrison Industries presentation is ready for your review." I nodded and made my way to my corner office, passing the open workspace where my team of 12 employees worked on campaigns for clients ranging from local startups to international corporations. The energy in the room was electric, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the low hum of strategic discussions. This was my world, the one I'd built from nothing while my parents thought I was tinkering with computers. "Nick, you've got the video call with the London client in 10 minutes, my assistant Rachel reminded me as I settled at my desk. She was fresh out of Northwestern, sharp as a tack, and handling logistics that would make a Fortune 500 executive assistant jealous. I pulled up the Morrison Industries presentation on my screen. It was a comprehensive digital transformation strategy for a manufacturing company that had been struggling to reach younger demographics. The proposal was worth $2.3 million over 18 months, more than Marcus would make in 5 years, even with his fancy new promotion. My phone buzzed with a text from my college roommate Jessica. "Saw your mom's Facebook post about Marcus again. How are you holding up?" I smiled sadly. Jessica was one of the few people who knew the truth about my business. She'd been there when I'd landed my first major client, when I'd hired my first employee, when I'd signed the lease on this office space. She'd also been there through every family gathering where I'd been dismissed and overlooked. "Same old story," I typed back. "Sunday dinner should be interesting." The video call notification chimed and I straightened my blazer. "Good afternoon, London," I said as the screen filled with familiar faces. "I trust you've had a chance to review our Q4 strategy recommendations." For the next hour, I led a discussion about market penetration strategies, user acquisition costs, and conversion optimization. The client's CMO, a woman in her 50s who'd been in marketing longer than I'd been alive, hung on every word. When we finished, she thanked me for the brilliant insights and confirmed they'd be moving forward with the full campaign. After the call, I leaned back in my chair and stared out at the Chicago skyline. The afternoon sun was reflecting off the glass buildings, creating a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. Sometimes I felt like I was living in 2 different worlds. The one where I was Nicole, the underachieving daughter who couldn't figure out her life, and the one where I was Nick, the CEO who commanded respect and built strategies that transformed businesses. "Knock, knock," Sarah said, poking her head into my office. "The team's grabbing lunch at that new place on Wacker. You coming?" I checked my watch. "Actually, I should probably head home. Family dinner prep, you know how it is." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You still haven't told them, have you?" I shook my head. Sarah had been pushing me for months to come clean with my family about the business. She couldn't understand why I kept it secret, why I let them think I was struggling when I was actually thriving. "Nick, you employ 12 people. You've got clients in 6 countries. You're about to close the biggest deal in the company's history. At some point, you're going to have to own your success. It's complicated," I said, which was my standard response whenever anyone questioned my secrecy. But Sarah was right, and I knew it. The business had grown far beyond what I'd ever imagined when I'd started it in my dorm room. What had begun as freelance social media management had evolved into comprehensive digital strategy consulting. I had retainer clients paying me $50,000 a month, one-time projects worth hundreds of thousands, and passive income streams from digital products I'd created. I'd been featured in industry publications, spoken at conferences, and had other agency owners asking me for advice. But to my family, I was still just Nicole who played around on computers. The drive home to Lincoln Park gave me time to think. I'd bought the condo in River North for the office, but I'd kept the apartment in Lincoln Park because it felt more like home. It was smaller, cozier, and it let me maintain the illusion that I was still the struggling daughter my parents expected me to be. As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I could hear my upstairs neighbor's TV through the thin walls. Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who'd lived in the building for 30 years, always had the volume turned up too high. She thought I was a nice young lady who worked very hard, and I'd never corrected her assumption that I was probably making minimum wage. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my heels and looked around at the modest space. The furniture was nice, but not extravagant. The kitchen was functional, but not fancy. Everything was designed to support the narrative that I was just getting by. just figuring things out. But hidden in the bedroom closet was a safe containing contracts worth millions, investment statements showing a portfolio that most people would retire on, and business documents that told the real story of who I'd become. I pulled out my laptop and checked my personal email. 3 more interview requests from business magazines, an invitation to speak at a digital marketing conference in Miami, and a message from a venture capital firm wanting to discuss potential investment opportunities. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow was Sunday dinner, and I knew exactly how it would go. Mom would spend the first hour talking about Marcus's promotion. Dad would ask me when I was going to find a real job, and I'd sit there quietly, nodding and smiling while they planned my brother's future and worried about mine. But something felt different this time. Maybe it was Sarah's words, or maybe it was the fact that I was getting tired of living 2 separate lives. Maybe it was time to stop hiding who I'd really become. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Marcus's number. Before I could second-guess myself, I typed, "Looking forward to meeting your girlfriend tomorrow. Hope she's ready for the full family experience." He responded quickly. "Ha, fair warning. Mom's already planning the wedding. How's business?" I stared at the message for a long moment. How's business? If only he knew that business was an empire that employed people, generated millions in revenue, and had me consulting for companies he'd probably recognize from billboards and TV commercials. "Growing," I typed back, faster than I expected. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the whole truth either. But maybe, just maybe, it was a start. Sunday afternoon arrived with that crisp October weather that makes Chicago feel alive. I stood in front of my closet, staring at the 2 versions of myself hanging there. On one side were the power suits, designer blazers, and expensive dresses I wore to client meetings and industry events. On the other side were the casual clothes, the safe choices that wouldn't draw attention or questions about where I could afford to shop. I reached for a simple sweater and jeans, the uniform of the underachieving daughter. But as my fingers touched the fabric, I hesitated. In a few hours, I'd be sitting at my parents' dining room table, listening to them praise Marcus while treating me like I was still trying to figure out my life. The thought made my stomach twist. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Survival kit for today's dinner. Wine, patience, and the knowledge that you're secretly crushing it. You got this." I smiled despite my mood. Jessica always knew exactly what to say. She'd been my roommate at DePaul when I'd first started the business, staying up late with me as I worked on my first real client project, a local bakery that wanted to increase their online presence. She'd watched me evolve from nervous college student to confident CEO, even when I refused to let anyone else see that transformation. The drive to my parents' house in Arlington Heights took me through neighborhoods I'd grown up in, past the high school where I'd been the quiet kid who spent lunch in the computer lab, past the community college where my parents had suggested I take practical classes after graduation. Everything looked smaller than I remembered, as if success had given me a different lens through which to view the world. Mom and Dad's house was exactly as I'd left it. The same beige siding, the same perfectly manicured lawn, the same feeling that everything had to be just right for the neighbors to see. I could see Marcus's BMW in the driveway, which meant he and his mysterious girlfriend had already arrived. "Nicole!" Mom practically sang as she opened the door. Come in, come in. You have to meet Catherine. She's absolutely perfect." I followed her into the living room, where Marcus was sitting on the couch next to a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a law firm recruitment brochure. Catherine was beautiful in that polished, professional way. Dark hair in a sleek bob, perfectly applied makeup, and a cashmere cardigan that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Nick, this is Catherine," Marcus said, standing to give me a hug. "Catherine, this is my little sister Nicole." Little sister. I was only 2 years younger than Marcus, but the phrase always made me feel like I was 12 years old again. "It's so nice to meet you," Catherine said, extending a manicured hand. "Marcus has told me so much about you. I understand you work in marketing?" The way she said marketing made it sound like I sold insurance door to door. I shook her hand, noticing the expensive watch on her wrist and the subtle designer logo on her handbag. "Something like that," I said, which was technically true but felt like a lie. "Catherine just made junior partner at her firm," Mom announced, as if Catherine hadn't been sitting right there to share the news herself. "At 26! Can you imagine? She specializes in corporate mergers and acquisitions." "That's impressive," I said, and I meant it. Junior partner at a major law firm was a significant achievement, but I also couldn't help thinking about the merger deal I'd worked on last year, helping a client navigate the digital integration of 2 companies. My consulting fee for that project alone had been more than Catherine probably made in 6 months. "What kind of marketing do you do?" Catherine asked, settling back onto the couch next to Marcus. "Social media? Like Posting on Instagram for businesses? I felt my jaw tighten. I do digital strategy consulting. It's more comprehensive than just social media. Oh, that's interesting, she said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. I have a friend who does social media for a boutique. She says it's fun but hard to make a living at it. Before I could respond, Dad emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of appetizers. There's my girl, he said, giving me a kiss on the cheek. How's the job hunt going? Any luck with those applications we talked about? I hadn't talked to him about any job applications because I wasn't looking for a job. I had a job. I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. But explaining that would require explaining everything else. And I wasn't ready for that conversation. Still exploring options, I said instead. Well, don't wait too long, Dad said, settling into his recliner. The economy's competitive right now. You might want to consider something more stable. Catherine here could probably give you some advice about professional development. Catherine smiled graciously. I'd be happy to help. Law isn't for everyone, but there are lots of opportunities in the corporate world for people with the right skills and presentation. The right skills and presentation. I thought about the presentation I'd given to Morrison Industries, the one that had impressed executives with decades of experience. I thought about the clients who called me brilliant, who trusted me with their company's future, who paid me more in a month than Catherine made in a quarter. That's very kind of you, I said, because anything else would have started a conversation I wasn't prepared to have. Dinner was exactly what I'd expected. Mom had made her famous pot roast, the dining room table was set with her good china, and the conversation revolved entirely around Marcus and Catherine's achievements. Catherine told stories about high-profile cases, Marcus shared details about his corner office, and my parents beamed with pride. You know, Mom said as she served dessert, I was telling Mrs. Patterson next door about Marcus's promotion. She said her daughter is looking for a good lawyer for her divorce. I gave her Marcus's card. Mom, I do corporate law, not family law, Marcus said, but he was smiling. Well, maybe Catherine could help, Dad suggested. It's nice to have such accomplished young people in the family. Young people, plural, as if I wasn't sitting right there, as if I wasn't also a young person with accomplishments worth mentioning. What about you, Nicole? Catherine asked suddenly. Are you dating anyone? Meeting people through work? I almost laughed. If only she knew about the networking events I attended, the industry mixers where I was often the youngest person in the room, the professional relationships I'd built with some of the most successful people in Chicago. I'm focused on my career right now, I said, which was true even if she didn't understand what that career actually entailed. Smart, Catherine said, though it's important to have work-life balance. Marcus and I met through work, actually. There's something to be said for finding someone who understands your professional ambitions. Professional ambitions. I wondered what Catherine would think of my ambitions if she knew about them. I wondered if she'd be quite so condescending if she knew that the quiet girl in the corner was building something bigger than anything she'd ever imagined. After dinner, I helped Mom clear the dishes while Marcus and Catherine sat in the living room with Dad, discussing real estate markets and investment strategies. I could hear Catherine's confident voice explaining market trends and Dad's impressed responses. She's perfect for Marcus, isn't she? Mom said, rinsing plates in the sink. So poised, so professional. I can already see them at the country club Christmas party. She seems very accomplished, I said carefully. It's wonderful when young people know what they want and go after it, Mom continued. I worry sometimes that your generation doesn't have enough ambition. But Catherine and Marcus, they're really making something of themselves. I dried a plate slowly, thinking about the contracts in my apartment safe, the employees who depended on me, the clients who trusted me with their businesses, making something of themselves. If only she knew what I'd already made. Nicole, honey, Mom said, turning to face me. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but Catherine might be a good role model for you. She's proof that with the right focus and determination, you can achieve anything. I set down the dish towel and looked at my mother. For a moment, I considered telling her everything. About the business, about the success, about the fact that I didn't need a role model because I was already living the life I'd built for myself. But then I heard Catherine's laugh from the living room, followed by Dad's voice saying, You two are going to have beautiful, successful children. The moment passed. I picked up the dish towel and dried another plate. You're right, Mom, I said. Catherine is very impressive. As I drove home later that evening, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Sarah on Friday. At some point, you're going to have to own your success. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding who I'd become. But as I pulled into my parking spot in Lincoln Park, I realized that owning my success would mean risking everything I'd built in the shadows. It would mean changing not just how my family saw me, but how I saw myself. The question was, Was I ready for that kind of change? The week after the dinner passed in a blur of client calls, strategy meetings, and the constant hum of success that my family knew nothing about. I'd closed the Morrison Industries deal, $2.3 million, the biggest contract in my company's history, and my team had thrown a small celebration in the office. Sarah had surprised me with champagne and a cake that read Empire Builder. But even as I smiled and accepted congratulations, I felt that familiar emptiness that came from having no one to really share it with. "You've been quiet all week," Jake observed on Friday afternoon, looking up from his monitors. "Everything okay, boss?" I was standing by the window watching the Chicago River flow past the merchandise mart. The afternoon sun was hitting the water just right, creating sparkles that reminded me of the way my mother's eyes used to light up when I brought home good grades in elementary school. Before Marcus became the golden child, before I became the disappointment. "Family stuff," I said, which was my standard explanation for the melancholy that sometimes crept in around the edges of my success. "You know what you need?" Sarah said, appearing in my doorway with a stack of contracts. "You need to go to that business leadership conference in Miami next month, the one that keeps asking you to keynote." I'd been invited to speak at the Future of Digital Marketing Summit, one of the most prestigious events in the industry. The speaking fee alone was $75,000, and the networking opportunities were invaluable. But accepting would mean stepping fully into the spotlight, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that level of visibility. "I'm thinking about it," I said, which was what I always said when people pushed me toward recognition. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Family dinner Sunday. Mom's making her famous lasagna. Catherine's coming again. She's excited to get to know you better." I stared at the message, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. Another dinner where I'd sit quietly while everyone celebrated Marcus's life and politely inquired about my little projects. Another evening of feeling invisible in my own family. But this time, something felt different. Maybe it was the Morrison Industries celebration, or maybe it was the weight of keeping my secret for so long, but I found myself typing back, "Actually, I have some news to share too. See you Sunday." I hit send before I could second-guess myself, then immediately regretted it. What news? What was I going to tell them? That I'd been lying about my life for the past 3 years? That while they'd been worrying about my future, I'd been building an empire they couldn't even imagine? Saturday dragged by with unusual slowness. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept drifting to the conversation I might have with my family. I'd practiced different versions in my head. The casual reveal, the dramatic announcement, the gentle explanation. None of them felt right. Jessica called that evening. "You sound stressed," she said after I'd answered with a distracted hello. "I think I'm going to tell them," I said, pacing around my apartment. "Tomorrow, at dinner." "Tell them what, exactly?" "Everything. The business, the money, the success. All of it." There was a pause. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm tired of living 2 different lives. I'm tired of being proud of myself in private and ashamed of myself in public." "You're not ashamed of yourself," Jessica said gently. "You're just protecting yourself. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because it feels like shame. It feels like I'm hiding because I don't think I deserve to be seen." Sunday arrived with gray November clouds that made Chicago feel smaller and more claustrophobic than usual. I stood in front of my closet again, but this time I reached for the other side. The blazer I'd worn to close my first major deal. The confident clothes that made me feel like the CEO I'd become. If I was going to tell them, I might as well look the part. The drive to Arlington Heights felt longer than usual, every mile bringing me closer to a conversation that would change everything. I thought about the safe in my bedroom closet, the contracts and bank statements that proved who I really was. I thought about my team, my clients, my success. I thought about the girl who'd started this business in her dorm room, believing she could build something that mattered. Mom's face lit up when she saw me at the door. "Nicole, you look nice." "Is that a new blazer?" "Something like that," I said, accepting her hug and trying to calm my racing heart. The family was already gathered in the living room. Marcus and Catherine on the couch, Dad in his recliner, everyone looking comfortable and content. I took a seat in the chair across from them, the one I'd occupied countless times before as the quiet observer of other people's achievements. "So," Mom said, settling beside Dad, "Marcus told us you have some news to share. Are you finally applying to graduate school?" I took a deep breath. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about my business." "Your business?" Dad raised an eyebrow. "You mean the marketing thing?" "It's more than that," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I run a digital strategy consulting firm. We have 12 employees, offices in the merchandise mart, and clients across 6 countries." The room went quiet. Marcus leaned forward, his expression curious. Catherine looked skeptical. My parents exchanged glances. Nicole, honey, Mom said gently, that's wonderful that you're dreaming big, but I'm not dreaming, I interrupted. I closed a $2.3 million deal this week, the Morrison Industries contract. It's the biggest project we've ever landed. Catherine laughed, a sound that was meant to be kind but came out condescending. Nicole, I think you might be misunderstanding how business works. A $3 million contract would be huge for any consulting firm, especially one run by someone just starting out. I'm not just starting out, I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. I've been building this business for 3 years. I have a team, a real office, recurring clients. I spoke at 3 industry conferences last year. Conferences about what? Dad asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Digital transformation, marketing strategy, brand development. The same things Catherine does for her clients, just in a different space. It's not the same thing, Catherine said, her voice taking on that professional tone she used when explaining complex legal concepts. Corporate law and social media marketing are completely different fields. The skill sets, the education requirements, the earning potential, they're not comparable. I felt something snap inside me. You're right, they're not comparable. Because I made more money last month than you made all year. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at me. Dad's mouth fell open, and Mom looked like I'd just announced I was joining a cult. Nicole, Mom said slowly, I know you want to be successful, but exaggerating won't help. I'm not exaggerating, I said, standing up. I have bank statements, contracts, tax returns. I can prove every word I've said. Even if that's true, Catherine said, her voice tight, there's no need to be rude about it. Rude? I turned to face her. I've spent 3 years listening to everyone in this room talk about my lack of ambition, my inability to focus, my need for a role model. I've sat through dinner after dinner where you've all worried about my future while I was building something bigger than any of you imagined. And now that I'm finally telling you the truth, I'm being rude? Nicole, calm down, Marcus said, but his voice was uncertain. I am calm, I said, though I could feel my hands shaking. I'm calmer than I've been in years, because I'm finally done pretending to be someone I'm not. I looked around the room at their faces, shocked, confused, disbelieving. These were the people who were supposed to know me best, supposed to support me, supposed to believe in me. Instead, they were looking at me like I was a stranger. I have to go, I said, grabbing my purse. But just so we're clear, I don't need anyone's advice about my career. I don't need a role model. And I don't need you to worry about my future. I've got it handled. I walked toward the door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Behind me, I heard Mom say, Nicole, wait! But I didn't turn around. As I drove home through the gray Chicago afternoon, I realized that I'd just done something I couldn't take back. I'd torn down the wall between my 2 lives, and there was no going back to the comfortable shadows I'd been hiding in. The question was, what came next? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the dinner, every word I'd said, every shocked expression on their faces. Part of me felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of the secret was finally gone. But another part of me felt terrified, like I'd just jumped off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. My phone had been buzzing all evening with texts I hadn't answered. 3 from Marcus, 2 from Mom, even 1 from Dad. I wasn't ready to read them yet. I wasn't ready to face whatever came next. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I got to the office early, before anyone else, and sat in my chair staring out at the Chicago River. The water looked choppy and restless, mirroring how I felt inside. You're here early, Sarah said, appearing in my doorway with 2 cups of coffee. Rough weekend? I accepted the coffee gratefully and told her everything. The dinner, the confrontation, the way I'd walked out. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from surprise to pride to concern. How do you feel? She asked when I finished. Terrified, I admitted. Like I just blew up my entire family. Or like you finally told them who you really are. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Hey, I said cautiously. Nick, we need to talk. Can I come to your office? I gave him the address, something I'd never done before. 20 minutes later, he was standing in my reception area, looking around with wide eyes at the sleek furniture, the company logo on the wall, the bustling workspace beyond. This is really yours? He asked as I led him to my office. Every square foot of it. He settled into the chair across from my desk and ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from childhood when he was trying to process something difficult. I owe you an apology, he said finally. We all do. I had no idea. How could you? I never told you. But that's just it. Why didn't you tell us? Nick, this is incredible. This office, this business, what you've built here? Why would you keep it secret? I leaned back in my chair, trying to find the words. Because you all had such clear ideas about who I was supposed to be. The struggling daughter, the one who couldn't figure it out, the one who needed guidance and worry and advice. It was easier to let you believe that than to risk changing the dynamic. But we're your family. We want to celebrate your success. Do you? I asked. Because yesterday, when I tried to tell you about it, nobody believed me. Catherine laughed. Mom thought I was exaggerating. Dad looked confused. Even you seemed skeptical. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. You're right. We didn't handle it well. Catherine feels terrible, by the way. She called me last night completely mortified. She had no idea she was being condescending to someone who was actually more successful than she is. It's not about being more successful, I said. It's about being seen. It's about being taken seriously. It's about not having to prove I belong at my own family dinner. You're right, he said simply. We've been treating you like you were still the uncertain college kid who didn't know what she wanted to do with her life. We missed the fact that you'd grown into this incredible entrepreneur. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Morrison Industries just called. They want to discuss expanding the contract. Also, 3 new inquiries came in this morning. Words getting out about your presentation. I showed Marcus the message. This is what my days look like. Client calls, strategy meetings, business development. The same things you do, just in a different industry. Can you show me around? He asked. I want to see everything. For the next hour, I gave Marcus a tour of my empire. I introduced him to my team, showed him the project boards where we tracked campaigns for major clients, explained the systems I'd built and the processes I'd developed. I watched his expression shift from surprise to amazement to something that looked like pride. The Morrison Industries campaign, I said, pulling up the presentation on my computer. The one Catherine said couldn't possibly be real. It's a comprehensive digital transformation strategy. 18 months, multiple phases, complete overhaul of their customer acquisition and retention processes. Marcus studied the screen, reading through the executive summary. This is the kind of strategic thinking that Fortune 500 companies pay top consulting firms millions for. That's because they do. That's exactly what this is. He shook his head slowly. I feel like an idiot. We all feel like idiots. You've been building this incredible business, and we've been asking when you're going to get a real job. I thought about bringing you here before, I admitted. But I was scared. Scared you'd think I was showing off. Scared you'd find ways to diminish it. Scared you'd somehow make it feel smaller than it was. And instead, we made you feel smaller than you were. That afternoon, Marcus called our parents and asked them to come to the office. Mom arrived looking nervous, Dad looked confused, and they both seemed overwhelmed by the professional environment I'd created. Nicole, honey, Mom said, looking around the reception area. This is really all yours? I nodded and led them on the same tour I'd given Marcus. I watched their faces as I explained the business, introduced them to my employees, showed them the client testimonials hanging on the wall. Sarah made a point of mentioning the industry awards I'd won, the conferences where I'd spoken, the articles that had been written about my innovative approaches. She's been featured in Marketing Today 3 times, Sarah told them proudly, and she was asked to keynote the Future of Digital Marketing Summit in Miami next month. You never told us about any awards, Mom said, her voice small. You never asked about my work, I replied gently. When I tried to explain what I was doing, it got dismissed as playing around on computers. Dad stopped in front of a framed article from Business Weekly that featured me in their 30 under 30 entrepreneurs to watch list. This is you, he said, his voice filled with wonder. Our Nicole. I've always been your Nicole, Dad. You just didn't know who that was. By the time we finished the tour, Mom was crying. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. And I'm so sorry we didn't see what you were accomplishing. We thought we were being supportive, Dad added, asking about job applications, worrying about your stability. We didn't realize you were more stable than any of us. That evening, Marcus insisted on taking everyone to dinner at one of Chicago's best restaurants. His treat, he said, to celebrate what should have been celebrated years ago. Catherine met us there, and she was genuinely gracious as she apologized for her comments. I was completely out of line, she said. I made assumptions based on my own limited understanding of your industry. What you've built is extraordinary. It's different from what you do, I said, but it's valid in its own way. More than valid. It's impressive as hell. As we sat around the table, sharing stories and asking questions I'd been waiting years for them to ask, I felt something shift inside me. The 2 versions of myself, Nick the CEO and Nicole the daughter, were finally merging into one complete person. So what's next? Marcus asked as we finished dessert. The Miami conference? Expanding the business? Taking over the world? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. All of the above, maybe. But first, I think I'm going to stop hiding. No more separate lives, no more secrets. Just me, all of me, with all of you. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We want to know everything. Every client, every success, every challenge. We want to be part of this. Even if you don't always understand the industry? Especially then, Dad said. We'll learn. We want to learn. As I drove home that night, I thought about the girl who'd started this business in her dorm room, the one who'd been so afraid of being seen that she'd built an empire in the shadows. She'd been brave enough to dream big, but not brave enough to own her dreams. But that girl was gone now. In her place was someone who'd learned that success wasn't just about building something extraordinary. It was about having the courage to claim it, to stand in the light, to let the people who mattered see who you really were. My phone buzzed with a text from the Miami conference organizers. Final confirmation needed for keynote speech. The industry is excited to hear from you. I typed back without hesitation. Confirmed. Looking forward to it. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't hiding anymore. I was Nicole Martinez, CEO, entrepreneur, daughter, sister, all of it, all at once, all out in the open, and it felt like coming home.